from the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening, I'm McDonald. Thank you for joining us on OpenLine. I'm filling in tonight as we talk about the war in Ukraine and that conflict that continues. It's June 13th and this war has been going on for 110 days. Joined with me tonight is Vanderbilt University professor Dr. Tom Schwartz. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me on the program.
You've been a bit of a regular. We've talked to you about this before too, but
Sure.
As I mentioned, that was 2 months ago and we're still in the thick of things. However, can you set the scene, because we just went over the national news and it doesn't start off the newscasts anymore.
No, and that is one of the concerns that Ukrainians have expressed, that the world's going to lose interest as the war settles into a sort of slogfest in the eastern territories. The drama of the war captivated people at the beginning, the attempt to take over the entire country, the Russian assault on Kiev, all of this. Having resisted that and having in that sense been successful early in the war, the Ukrainians are now facing the problem that the Russians do have far more ammunition, they have more troops, and that they're throwing it at them in the eastern territories. And those territories are the areas where they're right on the border with Russia, where they can easily supply their troops, where they can, they have a lot of Russian speakers there. They've been present there for since 2014 when they annexed part of that territory. They're seeking to expand that territory, and they're fighting a bitter conflict there. And the Ukrainians are saying now that they're losing between 100 and 200 soldiers a week, which is a very high casualty toll for a country of Ukraine's size.
Yeah, that's incredible. One of the things that I think probably grabs our attention, though, is perhaps how it does impact us. We talked about inflation being one of the biggest things on the news right now. So as we look at this conflict, are we getting it right or wrong in the general public opinion that some of our problems here with inflation, gas prices, are connected to what's happening there?
They are connected. There's no question that taking as large a supplier as Russia was of both natural gas and oil, and taking a lot of that off the market is going to affect oil prices and going to send the gas prices higher. And so in that sense, the president is correct to blame part of the acceleration of inflation on the war. The war has also affected food prices in the sense that Ukraine's food is also not being able to be shipped out. But I think the problem of inflation is much more connected to, I think, our own domestic spending, and to the fact that there's, on the monetary explanation, that there's a lot more money in circulation and a lot fewer goods. And in that sense, we're facing what was a classic problem in the 1970s as well, where energy prices aggravated larger inflation problems within the economy.
Well, the show is called OpenLine, so we want people to call in and talk to us about any of these topics that we talk about tonight. The number on the screen, 615-737+. So please, the phone lines are open. Give us a buzz. We will get back to inflation, I think, in a little bit, but let's talk about some of the pressure that the U.S. and other Western countries have tried to put on Russia. The war has continued, but have any of those sanctions done anything?
That's a question. It's interesting. There is a debate among analysts as to whether it's had much effect. Clearly, it hasn't stopped anything to do with the actual assault by the Russians in the east. It may have affected Putin, although I think more likely what really affected Putin's goals is the stiffening of the Ukrainian resistance and the fact that the country didn't collapse as quickly as he expected. I think the sanctions have certainly hit ordinary Russians, but oil prices being as high, Russia is still able to export its oil. There are a number of countries that are still buying Russian oil, so Putin still has a fairly large cash reserve that he's receiving from countries like China and India and others that are buying his oil. And in that sense, the sanctions may take much, much longer to have any real effect. And it's clear that, for example, that there hasn't been any great anti-war agitation in Russia that might have stopped the war either.
You mentioned that they're still making money on exporting fossil fuels. So I think I heard a number correctly that ended with a B today. Started with a B today, $1 billion. I mean, that's how much money they're still able to make from China, from even Germany. Exporting some of
oil and natural gas are still gaining markets in Europe. The cutoff hasn't been complete.
But you said that ordinary Russians may be feeling some
I'm sure they're feeling the effect of shortages, of the closing down of a lot of contacts with the West. It's not significant enough probably to have a true impact, because essentially Putin has framed the conflict as one of Russia against NATO and the world, and in a way he's played very strongly on nationalist and patriotic sentiments that have kept a lot of ordinary Russians in support despite what the sanctions have done. So in that sense, he doesn't seem to be suffering yet in his popularity or support within Russia.
How about Ukraine's leader? Within the last month, we have seen him still continue to meet with high-powered American politicians, travel the world on Zoom. How is he doing keeping his country's story in the headlines?
Well, he's been phenomenally successful in terms of his public outreach. He's managed to make, I think, he's given Ukraine a new face, a very a popular and important one. The only problem is he is facing, as we mentioned early on, he is facing the idea of news fatigue, a fatigue that people already know the story, and that the drama of the early period, he's not able to recapture some of that, or try to recapture some of that with people. And in that sense, I think he's facing a real dilemma. He's also facing the dilemma of being pressured now, or at least it being talked about, of what type of peace settlement. How does this end? And he has been very adamant that it should end with Ukraine returning, getting back all of its territory. Ukraine, at least according to his estimate, has lost some 20% of its territory. Now, the problem with that is that some of those territories are ones that Putin took in 2014, the Crimea and some of the eastern territories, and it would take an enormous investment of arms and men to really reconquer those territories, and it's unlikely to happen. And so the outlines of a peace settlement are something that's very difficult also, that Zelensky has to face and deal with, what type of peace settlement he might have to accept.
You mentioned news fatigue. I'm going to have you tell me, you were watching the news tonight, and it was hard not to get sentimental, you said, after watching one story. I mean, those do have quite the effect. What story did you watch?
It was a story that Richard Engel did on a Ukrainian orphanage, an orphanage largely for children with disabilities, mental and physical disabilities, who had been largely left behind, in the sense that many of their parents and others had left the country, fled with able-bodied children and others, and these children are left behind. They can't be evacuated. And it was a heartbreaking story to see that, and to recognize that these children are still in danger, and that the possibilities. Ukraine's economy is going to shrink mightily from this. Its government's going to need continued assistance. There's the question of really even rebuilding the country is going to require billions of dollars from Europe and the United States and other international donors. So Ukraine has a long road to go, and that's something that's obviously going to be a major topic as we discuss, what role the United States should play in all this.
I remember on day 1, 2, 3 of this conflict, of this war back in February, it was said over and over again, we hadn't seen a war in a country that looked like Ukraine in a long time.
Yes.
So do you believe those images of seeing a pretty established society in its current state are powerful? Do you think?
They're very powerful. It's just that our attention span, the attention span of people these days, and this is a complicated subject and all of that, but the story is out there, it's dramatic, it's important, but it doesn't, other issues come to play. So we're now caught up with other, inflation, with the shortages we're facing, the January 6th hearings on impeachment, all of these sorts of things. Other stories compete for attention. And Ukraine is still far away, and even though the drama and the images were so shocking and awful early on, it's hard to maintain that degree of of awareness and concern in the West.
Of interest.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to be talking about something that's not too far away, the midterm elections. Will people be voting based on what they're seeing in Ukraine and what they're not seeing happen? Stay with us.